Okay, let's get started. We seem to have a group that, based on last week, that comes in all at once. They must be coming from another class or something. But I can't very well just wait around for them. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'll start passing the roll here. And also, along with the roll, is your sign-up sheet for your presentation. I think the presentation one, the other class is going to start presentation one next week, but they had a group that already volunteered to do it, so they were prepared to proceed on that basis. So on this presentation sheet, or sign-up sheet, you'll see a lot of, you'll see the chapters from the book that is on the Moodle site. If you go to Moodle, you'll see under our class, you'll see our textbooks here. If you don't know they're there, here they are. So we have an abridged version of 7 Habits. We have the College Success. We have a couple of things that I may or may not be using during the semester. Also our syllabus, which occasionally will be updated. For example, I will probably update it this week to show when your presentations will be. What I started to say is Team 1 will do I'll go ahead and give them 2 weeks to prepare. So we won't start presentations until 2 weeks from today, whereas the other class is starting 1 week from today, or 1 week from yesterday. Which means we'll have to double up, because this is also the larger class. And so we're going to have to have 2 presentations in some weeks. We have, because we're already, let's see, we're in week 4 now, and we have, I think we need to have 15 topics, according to the, they're not everybody's here today, but I'm presuming that they didn't all drop out all at once. But as of yesterday, there were 57 people signed up for this class. And so if there's 4 people, I'm going to go ahead and say 4 people per team. So 4 times 15 would be 60. Obviously, if we have 57, it's not quite to 60. So some teams will have only 3. And so if you have a 3-person team, that's fine. If somebody else wants to sign up with your team, that's up to them. But we'll have to have a few that only have 3 on them. You'll see, going back to the sign-up sheet, so most of these are chapters from the book College Success that's on the Google site. But that's still not enough, because that's only 9. I eliminated 3 of those chapters as being pretty much irrelevant to us. And so we go to chapter 8, and then we jump to 12. So that's 9 chapters out of that book, so we needed 6 more. So I've added some other characters here that you may or may not be interested in. With the first, Robert Kiyosaki wrote a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it's about investment, about how to make investments. He definitely looks at it from an American perspective, using American income tax laws and stuff, but it may have application here. But regardless, some of you may be interested in that. So it's basically real estate investments more than anything else. Dale Carnegie wrote one of the classics, I guess, in the area of success strategies, how to win friends and influence people. I think he wrote that back in like the 1930s or something, so it's like 80 years old, but still is oft-quoted and referred to. Napoleon Hill, likewise, it's kind of a classic. Many millions of people have read it over the decades. Probably written like in the 1950s, I think, maybe 1940s. Napoleon Hill. These 2, I do not have copies of the book, but there are lots of, you may end up basing it on videos on the YouTube if you sign up for these. I do know that Dale Carnegie's book is is in audio on YouTube. The entire book is in audio. I don't know that you'll be able to find the book in text, but you can at least get enough, I think, out of what's on YouTube to make a good presentation on that, and you have towards the end of the semester to do it. Same with Napoleon Hill. I'm not sure if the text of his book is on YouTube, or the audio of the entire book, but there's certainly lots of videos about it because it is a classic. I included a book, or actually Robert Greene as the author. He's written several books. One is The Art of Seduction. One is 48 Laws of Power. Again, lots of videos, YouTube videos on it. I'm not sure how much in text you'll be able to find on it, but certainly enough videos that you can create a PowerPoint and explain his perspectives on his various books. So those Kiyosaki, Carnegie, Hill, and Greene are going to basically, you need to Google it. I know there's stuff on YouTube because I've looked already. There's lots of stuff on YouTube. What you can find outside of YouTube, I'm not sure. Then those last two are, you just have to borrow this book from me. This is, I've mentioned already a couple of times, Clayton Christensen. We talked a little bit about his, how he's disrupting, is his word, business education with his new theories and stuff. And so I've chosen two of the chapters out of here for the last two presentations. But there's, if somebody really wants to replace one of those other four, Kiyosaki, Carnegie, Hill, or Greene, and do another Clayton Christensen chapter out of a book, I could handle that. That's no problem. But I think you'll find good stuff. So I think the way we have it set up here is fine. So I've explained here in this column here where, either it's certain pages in the College Success textbook that is in our Moodle site, or I'm just saying online video and text. So you just search for that stuff on YouTube and Google, or these last two you just borrow the book from me. So I'll get these passing around. Everybody needs to sign up to be on a team, and I'd like you to do it today. For those that are here, I don't think everybody isn't here, I don't think, but everybody is here should sign up, and of course sign in. For some reason, some of the students got confused in the other class. This is week 4, as far as I'm concerned, anyway. So sign up under week 4, please. Okay. I guess the other thing I was going to mention while I'm talking about this stuff and visiting our chapter here, just in case you don't know it, if you go to almost any YouTube video nowadays, let's just check this first one of mine to see if I'm telling the truth. Okay, let's start first. So again, my name is Harvey. Okay, so we're looking at this video. If you have a hard time understanding me, you can first off go and turn on you can watch the video version of me and get closed captions. Let's blow this up a little bit. So you can get the closed captions. YouTube does this automatically. I don't have to do anything for this. So YouTube automatically turns on or will make available a closed caption. It's not perfect because they're doing this electronically. They're electronically trying to interpret what I'm saying, and they sometimes don't understand me any more than you do. So once in a while, they also miss a word or two of mine, and so you need to be aware of that it's not a perfect transcription because I'm not providing the transcription. They're doing it automatically and electronically. Besides that, you can also, let me bring this down a little bit so that it gets recorded. Down here there's a ... And under the ... you will find open transcription. Let me get this out of the way so, again, it gets on the video. Open transcript, excuse me. You hit that one. And depending on, YouTube seems to be in the process of transition right now. And so sometimes it's here on the right side, and sometimes it's below. But here is the entire transcript of my lecture, or any lecture. So if you're listening to Covey, you can get the closed caption and the transcript from Covey. If you're listening to me, you can get the closed caption or the transcript from my stuff. Again, it's not perfect because it's done in an automated electronic fashion that I don't control. So just in case some of you are struggling to pick up on American English, that will come with time, and that's important for you. What's the point of learning English if you don't understand American English? That kind of defeats the purpose. And so it's important that you understand the accents and so forth that you may run into. And it gets worse, by the way. At the last university I was at, we had professors from Africa, from Australia, England, Pakistan, all over the place, speaking with accents that I struggled to understand. Even in the United States, I struggle to understand some accents in certain parts of the country. And so you're not the only ones that struggle with accents. I struggle with your accents. So if you do, please excuse me if I have to ask you to repeat yourself once in a while, because you have an accent I'm not, not real familiar with yet. And also, just FYI, I have a little bit of a hearing disability. Genetic, that I had from a child, and it's only in certain frequencies, so they can't even help me with a hearing aid. Hearing aid might amplify overall, but what the doctors say is in some frequencies I'm deaf, and other frequencies I have perfect hearing. So it's a frequency-based problem that I have, and a certain sound that is a problem for me. Just to alert you, is there's a certain frequency. For example, I grew up on a farm and we had a lot of rattlesnakes. Rattlesnakes are poisonous snakes that have a little rattle in their tail, and they shake it and go shh, 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 shh. And so they warn you if they're going to bite you. And neither my dad nor I could hear rattlesnakes, and we had lots of them near our farm in America. And we'd go hunting them sometimes to get rid of them. And so we had to take my little brother because he could hear them and we could not hear them. We captured a couple of them alive and put them into a terrarium. And inside of a terrarium, if I got about this far from the tail, I could hear it. But that's not a good place to be in if you're talking about a poisonous snake. You don't want to be 1 foot from its tail. So if you try whispering to me, that is the worst thing you can do. And usually when people whisper it to me, it's more for their sake than mine. Like it's after class and they come up and whisper, and they talk, if you notice this, it's just like a rattlesnake tail. And so a whisper is almost like that rattlesnake tail. It's a frequency I cannot hear. And so, I can kind of hear, but I can't hear it very well. So don't whisper to me. Talk out loud, and I can hear you okay. Background noise hurts it sometimes, so if there's lots of stuff going on in the background, sometimes that hurts my hearing too. But we'll struggle a little bit with each other's hearing. But again, if you go to YouTube, you can turn on closed caption, or you can go down to the ... below it and turn on the transcript. Sometimes it takes a day or two for this to be developed on a video, and so it might not be the same day, but certainly in a couple of days you should be able to find the closed caption and the transcript if you're wanting to understand better what I've been talking about. Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and go into our discussion today. Where are we? By the way, in the video, you may have noticed, this is what I'm seeing when I present. When I turn on go into the presentation mode, and this is what you will see when you present. It'll be the current slide. The audience, you only see the current slide. But the person doing the presentation with this PowerPoint system sees the current slide, the next slide, and then where I put my video here, there's an area for notes. And so if you are doing the presentation and you need some notes to help you, that's a good place to put them, because you can see them while you're kind of looking forward, and you can glance down and see your notes right in that area. Basically, well, in the PowerPoint, there's a little section underneath each slide that you can type in your notes. Those notes will appear when you're doing your presentation right where my personal video's at there. You'll see your notes. Let me talk about that a second before I go to the presentation also. In doing your presentations, starting 2 weeks from now, there's a sign-up sheet going around. Everybody needs to sign up. In doing your presentation, let me just explain a little bit about what you need to do to get an A anyway. I don't grade real hard in the presentations. If you're putting in a decent effort, it's rare that I give anything below a B if you're making a good effort. And so, in worst case scenario, you're not going to get hurt very bad by the presentation, as long as you're trying. But in order to get the A, I'm a little more stingy with that. And so to get up there, you might take a look at our critique sheet that's on the Moodle site. And I've already talked about a little bit, but let me just emphasize a few points. The first part of the critique sheet is your PowerPoint itself. Do not put too many words on each slide. Sometimes I do, if it's just in order to, like if I don't think you're going to read the textbook, I put some information on it for kind of in lieu of the textbook. But I don't expect you, in fact, if you see I put a whole bunch of words on it, I probably don't want you to try to read it while I'm talking. And that's the problem, however, that a lot of people do in doing presentations. They put too much information on each slide. And what that does is that forces the audience to decide, do I listen or do I read? You can't do both at the same time unless they're exactly the same. If you put your script on the slide, then you could probably speak and they could listen at the same time, and they could read and listen at the same time. But that's not best practices. That's a much too crowded PowerPoint to put your actual script on it. A PowerPoint is intended to be just notes, in fact, not complete sentences, just short phrases explaining what you're talking about. So you shouldn't be writing complete sentences, and there shouldn't be a lot of words on every slide. So I'm looking for that, but meanwhile you should have some graphics. So graphics and a few words in every slide. I mean, it could be 20 words, I don't have an exact number. It just depends, it depends on the exact words, it depends on your presentation, it depends on lots of things. But you don't want too many words on a slide. So I'll be looking for that. And you do want graphics, you do want graphic illustrations to help people understand and to make your PowerPoint, interesting, artistic, if you would. So those are the things I'm looking for under criteria 1. Criteria, in fact, let me say this. I sometimes have PowerPoints. Well, let me look at this one. This one isn't real long, but I would say, what do I have here? I have 32 slides. I have some presentations that I have 80 slides on. And the reason is because I'm keeping them with few words. So I'm trying to cover one concept per slide, very few words, a graphic. And so I have lots of slides, but not very many words on the slides. And so that's what is my preference. That's what I do, and that's what I would prefer you do. So if you have to choose, if you want to explain quite a bit and have quite a few words, it's not by having a lot of words on one slide, it's by having lots of slides. and you just go, you have a few words in each slide, and you just add more slides and more slides and more slides. I had a class, or a group present in my history class just this week, and they had 80 slides. They did a good job with it. They had good slides, and like I said, had quite a few slides. They went through. It was a good presentation. So that's criterion one. The second criterion is content. Content is somewhere between. It is basically what are you covering and how are you covering it. Point one with that: you don't have to cover everything in your chapter or on your subject. Indeed, in some of your chapters, you may have. I think. Well, let's go back and we can actually look here. Some of them are quite long. Now this book is like double spaced, so it's not as tight as a lot of textbooks are. I think it's double spaced, large letters. So it has over 500 pages in the book. They're not as dense, like I say, but in some cases you have 40 pages here, 40 pages there, 50 pages, more than 50 pages in this one, in this first one. This one's 50 pages, basically. So you see, you have some that are fairly long, 50-page chapters. You're not going to cover a 50-page chapter in 30 minutes. And that's basically what I'm looking at about 30 minutes. I don't want you to try. In fact, you will get lower points. Everybody listen to this. This is important. You will probably get lower points, lower credit, if you try to cover everything in a chapter. Because you're not going to do a good job of it. I want you to do a good job with what you cover. Don't cover everything. I may have mentioned in this class. If not, I'll tell you now that there's, from way back when I was your age, I took a class on education, and the teacher taught me, and I still remember, and that was, like I say, 45 years ago or whatever, that there's 4 things you have to do for somebody to understand a new concept. Define it, illustrate it, compare it to other concepts, and contrast it with other concepts. In other words, well, what I see too often in presentations is that you come up to a new concept and all you're doing is defining it. And you're not defining it very well, and it's not clear to people. At the very least, if you're going to talk about a new concept, you better at least get to the illustration side. Now, illustration can be verbal or graphic. So sometimes it's help, and sometimes a combination of the two. For example, in my journalism classes, and somebody's teaching about how to write the first paragraph of a news story, they could put up examples of what we call the lead, the first paragraph. They could put up a good example and a bad example. That is an illustration, a comparison, and a contrast, all in once. So that's a way of on the PowerPoint, they can define it verbally, and then they illustrate it and compare it and contrast it. What's good, what's bad. So that's an example of how to do it. So now I have students that have done that sort of a presentation, and all they do is kind of define it and go on, and the students don't really grasp it because they haven't illustrated it, they haven't compared it, they haven't contrasted it. And so just defining what a lead is, the first paragraph of a news story, isn't enough. And it isn't enough for some of these other concepts that you're going to be talking about. So what concepts you cover in your chapter should be covered well. If you mention a concept just to say, I better mention this because it's in the chapter, that's going to cost you points probably. I don't want you even to mention something you're not going to cover adequately. Don't cover it all. Leave it out. Whatever you cover, cover well. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for under the second criterion, is have you covered what you've covered well? Do it right, or don't do it. Don't cover that. Anything you don't want to do right, don't do. Just leave it out. Okay, understand that? Okay, criterion 3 is your presentation. If you're reading a script, it'll be harder for you to get a good presentation grade, because I'm looking for things like emphasis. How do you emphasize things? Do you do it with energy and enthusiasm? These are things that are hard to do when you're reading. You can do some things maybe even a little better. Maybe enunciation. You might even be able to do better if you're reading. But most things in a presentation are not going to be very good if you're trying to read. And so it's my best suggestion is you get a lot better points by not reading and by keeping eye contact and by giving us some emphasis on what you're talking about. You're not just reading monotone and this is my script and I'm going to read it just like this because I want to it be word perfect. That's boring. Nobody's going to be listening to it, and you're going to lose points on it. So my best suggestion is, if you want to write it out, you can. I've written out scripts before, but then I typically, unless I'm doing a video, with a video I might read the script, but if I'm doing a presentation, I'm not going to read a script. I'm going to, if I write it out, I'll write it out, and then I'll make notes. In fact, the PowerPoint itself in most cases, are my notes. If I feel like I need some additional notes, I might go ahead and print it out and write some notes on my printout. Write a few words here. It's also, as I mentioned, where if you put notes underneath your slides, they would appear right where you see my face there, right there. And so you can move this up into this area. You don't need to necessarily see your next slide, so you can physically, with your mouse, move the video of you up into this area and read your notes. So you can have a few notes here, but not very much. There might be room for 20 words or something to help you. But even then, be careful not just to read it like a script. You might be able to, if you know it well enough, you might be able to pull that off. A professional actor or actress can give good emphasis and give energy and enthusiasm and all this sort of stuff and be reading it because they're professionals. But most of us can't. And so, again, you're going to lose more points trying to read your script than becoming really, really familiar with it and going from notes and not trying to be word perfect. But trying to do it. But on the other hand, if you really feel like you have to read it, I don't grade that hard anyway. So, you might get a B instead of an A. But again, best practice and best grade will be probably if you don't read your script and if you can keep eye contact, talk to us, emphasize concepts, talk not naturally with us and not like you're reading. The last section, last criterion is kind of a miscellaneous, and it includes that you're supposed to be writing questions with your PowerPoint. So each person, if you're going to have a 4-person team, probably 2 questions is enough for each person. So about your section, you're going to write 2 questions, and you need to make slides with them. You need to put them on, create slides to review them with us. Your questions, they should be multiple choice questions. And so you can look at some of my questions that I create to kind of get an idea of what they should look like. One thing that you'll see that I do is frequently do questions like, which of the following is not true? And the reason I do that is that it's actually harder to create false responses than true responses. And so that's why I do reverse ones, which one's not true. Plus, the other reason I do reverse ones is I want you to remember the stuff that's true. And if I'm testing you and I put a bunch of false stuff in there, you might remember the false stuff and not the true stuff. So I prefer to do reverse multiple choice and say which of the following statements is not true. And go that way. But you can do it as you choose, but I do want multiple choice. So each person with your part of the presentation should also have 2 multiple choice questions that you build into the PowerPoint. You can present it to us right at the end of your your part of the presentation, or you can all do it at the very end. So everybody can do their presentation, and then at the very end, each person go review the questions from their part. That's up to you, where you want to do it. Any questions on that? Oh, the other part is of that miscellaneous is if you come up on a subject that you feel like is too Americanized and it needs to be localized, needs to make more sense to people from your culture, whether it's Chinese culture or Malay culture, whatever. If you think there's a way to localize it, be my guest, and if you do a good job, you might get extra credit for that. I don't think in this subject there's going to be that much of that, but in some of my other classes, like history, it's American-focused history, and it is in that class. Some people have picked up extra points by doing some extra research and adding some information not from the textbook. Not that they would abandon the textbook totally, but just kind of localize it a little bit or update it. If the textbook is a little bit outdated, they might update the statistics or something like that. So if there's any other questions on your presentations. So those are the things I'm looking at. Oh, the other part of that last criterion is you're supposed to give me a printed version before you present so I can make notes on it. And so I can grade you individually, and you're also to send me the electronic version so I can put your PowerPoint on Moodle for everybody to refer to, because your questions are going to end up in their quizzes, and so they need your PowerPoint to review to prepare for quizzes. So that's part of your responsibility too. Under the fourth criterion is to give me a printout and to send me the electronic version of your presentation. So it's going around, and Chapter 1 will be presented in 2 weeks. We will probably, I'm thinking that we will do just one presentation a week. I have to look at the calendar a little bit. That we're going to do one presentation a week until we're done with college success. So that'd be 9 weeks. And then we're going to cram in those last ones in the last, we're now in this is week 4. So that'd be in week 6. We'd only have 9 weeks left. Yeah, we can't do that. We'll have to double up before that. So I'll take a look at the calendar and revise the syllabus so you can see when your presentation will be. But in 2 weeks, we'll only have one for sure. One chapter, and 2 weeks from now, whoever signed up for Chapter 1 will be presenting Chapter 1. And I will announce next week the schedule for the rest of them then. Okay. So, when I hit this button here, I go into the mode like I was showing you, where I see the current slide, the next slide, and the notes section. You guys will only see the current slide. So that's what I'm trying to explain, is that you can expect the same thing when you're presenting. You will see the current slide, the next slide, and your note area from the current slide. But everybody else will only see that. So my computer is seeing something different than yours computer, and that's why, and mine is the one that's being recorded. So when you see the recorded version, as long as it's being done properly, then you will see, I typically bring my video down below the next slide because I don't refer to my notes here. I do have to adjust this to get my head into it properly, and you will too. Anyway, so we're now talking, continuing to talk about the Covey book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This week, you are going to have only one thing you have to do out of class, other than you have to do your journal entry, like always, and you have a quiz. But you only have one other piece of homework to do, and that is to watch this video. Problem is, it's a long video. This is a pretty strong overview by Stephen Covey himself of the entire well, not an entire book, but of the key concepts, many of the key concepts of his book. Some of it is a little bit redundant to what I'm talking about, but I think it actually helped reinforce what I'm talking about, and so that you'll do better in the quizzes. So that's not a bad thing. He'll approach it a little bit different direction, and it will reinforce some of the key concepts that will show up in the first quiz. So, if you don't get quite done during this week, well, there will be questions on the quiz this week for it. Let me put it that way. Your quizzes, as I mentioned, in most weeks are worth less than 1 point. They're worth less than a half a point because they're indication that you've been paying attention and doing your work. So they're your participation grade, basically. So most of them are not worth much, but those questions that are in the 0%, what I call the 0% participation quizzes, end up in the ones that do count more. So it's not a big deal if you haven't finished this and you miss a few questions on the quiz. Like I say, the quiz is only worth less than half a point, so it's not going to hurt too bad. But you should be aware of those questions and be prepared to answer them when it becomes worth more in one of the regular kind of quarterly quizzes, whatever you call it. So that will be your homework. Continuing in the book, and specifically, we saw this last week. This is kind of his illustration of his 7 habits, and where our focus is on number 1, be proactive. Part of the importance of being proactive is to overcome, you might say, overcome ourselves, overcome our own social mirror. You could kind of think of a social, well, have any of you ever gone to like a theme park or something and they had a mirror that made you look fat or made you look tall and skinny or something in between, something weird? If you haven't, take my word, they do exist. So there are mirrors that they do just for the fun of it, make you look strange. Like say tall and skinny, big and fat, whatever. Think about what your self-image would be if that was the only mirror you had in your life. You only had the one that made you look short and fat, or you only had one that made you look tall and skinny, or something, or some distortion of yourself. You would kind of question yourself quite a bit as to what am I, how ugly am I, or whatever, because all you have is this crazy mirror to look at. A lot of our self-image is from a reflection of other people. The way, right from the very start, I mentioned before, but it may have been before some of you signed up for the class. I think in the first week I was talking about 2 of my friends. One who had straight A's in high school, and the other one who had straight D's, pretty much. The smartest kid and the so-called dumbest kid in my class. The smartest kid, he first off drove truck for a couple of years while he was trying to figure out what he wanted to do in life. And then he ended up becoming a social worker and actually specifically a counselor in a prison to try to help people in prison to leave prison with better self-image, with better goals, with, leave and not come back again. I admire him for doing that. Okay, he could have been anything. He could have done something that would have made him rich probably because he was very, very smart. The dumb one, was dumb in things that get you good grades. So he wasn't that good of a reader. He wasn't a very good writer. He didn't really, maybe it's partly his own fault, maybe he didn't give much effort, but he didn't seem to have a good short-term memory, so he could cram per test and stuff. But, that maybe he just didn't try that hard. I don't know. But basically, like I said, the teachers just passed him on because they wanted to get rid of him. They figured he's not going to be anything anyway. Let's get rid of him. Let's put him on to the next class. So he was considered, like I say, the stupidest kid in the class. But there are some intelligences. I think I mentioned before. There's a theorist that has figured out that there's between 8 and 13 different types of intelligence. And some of them are not only not emphasized in class, they are actually punished in class. For example, my brother, I may have mentioned before, has very, 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 very high social intelligence. He knows how to work with people. Well, that earned him a B average in school. He was also not the best student in our family, let me put it that way. A couple of us had pretty much straight A's, and he had straight B's. And he kind of considered himself in our own family as the stupid one, probably, because our family, even though we grew up on a farm and stuff, we took pride in our academics. But while he was being punished for talking to his friends too much and making jokes and doing stuff like that, when he went to university and was bored by the university, and so he dropped out after 1 year of the university. He went to work, but he's now a multimillionaire because he's good with working with people. And so he's good in sales, good in human relations and managing his employees and so forth. And he's not stupid. He remembers stuff that's relevant to him. And he reads and studies things that are relevant to him. If it's not relevant to him, he doesn't want to, bother with it. And so he is who he is. And I often, ask, he's worth about 10 million. I'm worth about $10. Who's the success? So he actually admires me for books I write and stuff like that. And I admire the heck out of him for his success in business. Well, similarly, my friend Dennis, the dumb one, was not good in most of the subjects in school, but he was good in mechanics. We have a mechanical intelligence is one of the intelligences they've identified. So social intelligence is punished, mechanical intelligence is kind of ignored. Dennis was really good with mechanical. He had really strong mechanical intelligence. He wasn't strong in a lot of other intelligences. Mechanical intelligence he had. And so he became a master mechanic. So good that he teaches at a college. He teaches mechanics at a college. So now he's a college instructor, the dumbest kid in our class, and the smartest kid is a prison counselor. And so, as I asked before, when I did introduce, I think this in week 1, which one's more successful. They're both successful. If they're doing what makes them happy and they're making a good living and so forth, I would say they're equally successful. But the one that I admire most is Dennis, because for 12 years of school, everybody kept telling him, you are stupid, 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 stupid. And it wasn't just the teachers. Many of us also probably reflected, that's just Dennis, he's stupid. His friends probably reflected that, because that's the way we saw him, because that's the way he was labeled in a school setting. And so the social mirror can warp our image of ourselves. And so when we're talking about being proactive, in many cases, it is overcoming the social mirror. Dr. Covey himself talks about, and I think I mentioned this before, but I'll just return to it quickly, that they had a son that seemed to be stupid. He seemed to be uncoordinated. He was bad at sports. He was bad in school. And he embarrassed them. And it was actually in studying, he was studying something in order to present he was again already a consultant in business and teaching the stuff he teaches in his book, although he had not written the book yet. But he had to confront himself and ask himself if the social mirror that he and his wife were creating was hurting their son, who seemed not to be learning very fast and who was not very coordinated, who seemed to be kind of delayed in his development. And anyway, he read very specifically a study. Well, it's kind of an accidental study in a way. At a school in Great Britain, the teachers were informed which students were smart, and they gave their students all their students a test, and they were informed which students were stupid and which students were smart. And so they started teaching the students, and lo and behold, the students lived up to their reputation, so to speak. They lived up to the test. The kids that did poorly that they were told did poorly in the test, did poorly in class, and those that they were told did well on the test, did well in class. Problem is, several weeks into the school, they got a letter and said, "Oops, we gave you the wrong information. These scores were not proper. Actually, the kids that we told you were smart are actually your dumb ones, and the ones that we said were dumb are your smart ones. Our mistake. Sorry about that." And lo and behold, the whole class turned around right with that. Once the teacher started seeing them in new light, the kids that they thought were stupid actually started doing better, because that's what the test said they should do. And the kids that they thought were smart were now told, "No, you're not so smart." They started doing badly. And so this became the center of kind of an interesting study of what happened. What happened here? That just a report of a test that was inaccurate would change the performance of kids that the dumb ones should have kept being dumb. But because they were told they were smart, they acted smart. And the results were smart. And that's, again, a reflection of the social mirror. And so Covey and his wife talked about it, and they said, "You know what? We've got a problem here. Even though we try to defend our son, even though we try to coach our son, we're reflecting our social mirror in our son, and we're embarrassed by him. We are, for our own sake, we're doing a lot of stuff we're doing because our children give us social status. Our older kids are all doing great. Everybody admires us because of our older kids. And this younger child is embarrassing us. And that's a us problem, not a him problem." And with this, having just read this story about this school in Great Britain, he said, let's see what happens if we get our own selves in shape. Let's stop being embarrassed and stop thinking of him in a way that it reflects on us. Forget about us. He's our son. We love him. And so they just started loving him and accepting him for whatever he was going to be, whether he was going to be an athlete or not an athlete, whether he's going to be a great student or not a great student. They wanted to just love him for who he was and not think of him in terms of how he reflected on them, and just accept him. Well, lo and behold, he turned out to be a slow bloomer. He ended up getting straight A's in high school and being a star athlete. Whether he would have been if they hadn't changed their attitude, who knows? But he became everything they had ever hoped he would be. He was. And they felt like that their changing their attitude helped him develop at his own rate, in his own way, and become and fulfill his own potential, whatever that was, which turned out to be amazing. So, who we are, sometimes we tend to, again, accept who we are by how people reflect, and beyond that, a lot of people in our society tells us we are who we are because of something else. It's not our fault. For example, genetics. You can kind of say it's our grandparents' fault because they passed their genes down to us, and whatever that was, and that was bad, is their fault. In another case, it's how our parents raised us, especially when we were young. A lot of the psychiatrists, and so forth blame parental rearing about bad things they teach us because they raised us badly when we were young, particularly, and so we are who we are because of our parents and their bad parenting when we were young. Other people suggested it's an overall environment, that all the things in our environment, economic, social, how we, where did we grow up? Did we grow up rich? Did we grow up poor? All this sort of stuff. That is the environment overall that makes us who we are. And so Dr. Covey kind of asked, which of these is true? What do you think? And his point is none of them. He believes that it's only about 10% of the things that happen to us as far as our genetics and our parenting and everything else are things that we can't control. The rest we can control. And if it's 90% that we can control, then that's a lot. Sometimes we kind of see ourselves, we take on an attitude, like Garfield here. Where I'm residing? Board City. That's where. But not for long. With a positive mental attitude, I can whip it. I think I'll make a lateral move to self-pity. We adopt our self-image. We adopt our attitude. And we're in charge of it. So even things like that, we're in charge. We can change it if we want to. Many of you have probably read of the experiments by Pavlov, the Russian. I'm not sure if he associated what his background exactly was, but he did experiments with dogs and stuff, and he found that he could, if he rang a bell and then he fed them, that they would start associating the bell with the eating, and so they'd come running and they'd be salivating, and he could kind of control them through that. Since then, lots of other experiments have been done along that line. I saw one where they taught rats how to play basketball. And they did it by, if they got anywhere close to the basket, they would give them some food. And so they'd come closer to the basket. Then they wouldn't give them any until they touched the basket. And then they'd give them food. So they actually touched the basket to get food. Then they wouldn't give them any food until they put the ball in the basket. And so they actually, over a period of time, taught rats how to play basketball. So you can do things like that using the stimulus response control over animals. But what Covey points out is there's something different about humans. Let me, in fact, read a little bit. I'll try to read loudly. You could sit up closer. But in order to read, I'm going to put down the microphone. This is from his chapter, just the first part of it. Try to project your conscious upward into a corner of the room and see yourself in your mind's eye reading this book. Can you look at yourself almost as though you were someone else? So think of that. You're looking down, you're seeing yourself in this room. So now try something else. Think about the mood you're in now. Can you identify what mood you're in? Are you happy, sad? Can you think of why you're happy or sad? Consider that. Can you identify your mood? What are you feeling? How would you describe your present mental state? When we think about that, you're looking at yourself, you're thinking about who this person is, what kind of mood they're in. That's you. Now think for a minute about how your mind is working right now. Is it quick and alert? Do you sense that you're kind of torn between doing this mental exercise that you're being given or evaluating what's the point of this exercise? All of this that you're doing as you're thinking about this are things that animals can't do. He goes on and explains, for example, similarly, animals can't decide. Animals can be given habits, like Pavlov's dogs or the basketball playing rat. They can be made to adopt habits. What they can't do is they can't wake up some morning and say, I think I'm going to be more proactive. I'm going to exercise and create my own new habits because I want to be more proactive, or I want to begin with the end in mind. What is my goal in life? How am I going to be a better rat today? Or can they think, gee, I'm wasting a lot of time. I need to get my life better organized. Put first things first in my life. Animals can't do that. They can't see themselves from outside themselves, so to speak, and they're not aware of controlling their destiny. And so that is an important difference between you and them, and that's why you have the possibility of being proactive. This whole term of proactive is the opposite of reactive. So in this case, the rats and the dogs, they were given a stimulus, and they made a certain response. And in this case, Pavlov and other experimenters have been able to teach them habits with, we'll give you this stimulus if you give us this response. And so they've been able to control them and teach them. And to some degree, you can do that with humans. You can do that with your children. If if you're going to act up, I'm going to lock you in your room. So if you want to be in your room, that's fine. When you stop acting up, you can come out and be part of the rest of the free world, so to speak. You can teach them not to act up with different strategies like Pavlov and the animals. But ultimately, at some point, the child will make their own decision. Well, let me see, do I want to stop crying and give in to my parents and get out of the room, or do I want to make them suffer? And they can go through that thought process too. What do I want to do? Anyway, Viktor Frankl is an example that Dr. Covey uses in being able to control your own decisions between the stimulus and the response. Dr. Frankl was himself a Freudian psychologist. He believed that other things outside of us controlled our responses, that we were in essence not responsible for what we did and who we were. He lived in Germany. He was a college professor, and as I said, a Freudian psychologist. But he's also Jewish. So during World War II, he and his family were thrown into a concentration camp in Germany. His father died, his mother died, his brother died, his uncles died. Everybody in his family was wiped out in a concentration camp except him and a sister. What is the response to that stimulus? How would you respond to that? If you were thrown into a prison camp, how would you respond? I'm going to take my show on the road here a little bit. They want you to hear my audio very well on the video, but how would you feel if you were thrown into a concentration camp? You saw your family dying. You were sometimes having to just sit there naked. They wouldn't give you clothes. They didn't give you much food. You were starving to death. They didn't care if you got sick. Because they didn't care if you lived. What's your natural response to that stimulus? What are you going to do? What are your feelings going to be towards the guards that are keeping you in that concentration camp? You going to love them? Not likely. Are you going to be depressed? Almost certainly. In fact, some people just died from just giving up, he said. They just didn't care anymore. They stopped eating, they just died. They had nothing to live for. They lost their loved ones. They had just lost their will to live. So there are some natural responses to that situation. Dr. Frankl, after a while, he was sitting there naked in his sitting on his bed, all these things having happened to him. And he realized, actually, you know what, I can escape this. And so in his mind, he began escaping the prison camp. He started going to his classroom and enjoying the time with his students that he enjoyed before, in his mind only. He started going to the mountains to where his family had a cabin, enjoying nature out in the woods and in the mountains, in his mind only. But in that way, he escaped from the prison. Then he started thinking about the guards. He said, you know what? These guards are no happier being here than we are. Maybe a little more, but not very. Most of them want to be home with their families, too. They aren't here keeping us in prison on their own will. They don't want to be here either. And so he actually made friends with a lot of the guards because he understood. He started looking at it from their perspective. Then he started thinking, we don't have a lot of freedom here, but there's still a few things they let us control. And so he started a university in the concentration camp. He started identifying who people were that could teach him something and who he could teach stuff to. And so they started their own university in the concentration camp. And it actually helped them when they got out of the concentration camp to be more successful. So he survived the concentration camp, he and his sister. But after that, he was never the same person again, but not in a negative way. He was not the same person again in a positive way, because he realized that all the stuff he'd been taught about Freudian psychology was garbage, basically. He realized that he had himself changed the stimulus response theory, you might say, that Freud and others had perpetuated. That he himself had changed that for himself. He had, in a proactive way, decided, I'm not going to react like everybody else. I'm going to determine my reaction. I'm going to understand what the guards are going through too. I'm going to help the people in the concentration camp by giving them something to live for. I'm going to create a university. I'm going to, teach them how to escape like I'm escaping in my mind, how to survive this. And so he totally changed his entire approach to teaching. As he wrote a book about this, everything was different, and he actually came out in a positive way, despite losing his family. I mean, that's obviously not positive. But in some ways, he became a better person. So, what's the definition here of proactivity? Proactivity is the ability to control one's environment rather than have it control you. In other words, it's not really the environment, but it's your response to the environment. Self-determination, choice, and the power to decide response to stimuli, conditions, and circumstances. So that is basically, you take away all of your excuses for why you're not successful, so to speak. You now accept all the responsibility. Because that's the very nature of proactive versus reactive. The proactive person takes responsibility for his life, even though there's some things he doesn't control. He recognizes that. He's not an idiot. He knows there's some things in his life he cannot control. But he recognizes that there are lots of things he can control, and his response to other things are among them. So in here, between the stimulus and response, is that freedom to choose, which Frankel recognized, which Dr. Covey teaches in his book. A self-awareness that animals don't have. Imagination they don't have. A conscience, what's good or bad, that they don't have. An independent will to make decisions that they don't have. At least not to the extent we do. They do have some independence. They do make some decisions that in some cases, like a dog endangering his own life to save his master, you don't quite understand where he's coming from with that. So I don't want to, downgrade dogs, but they don't have the sort of consciousness that we have. They can't, like I said, pick up the Covey book and decide, I'm going to make myself proactive now. I'm going to start learning these 7 habits to become a better dog. Can't happen. I'm going to play this video, and Okay, I don't know why it's not letting me copy it. Let me try it here. Why cannot I get it to go? Let's go this way then. Okay, so by taking the initiative, by being proactive, you do make things change. You start selling to others and to yourself solutions rather than commiserating and being defeated by bad circumstances. You use your resourcefulness and your initiative. And you choose then to be the actor, not to be acted upon. So you do it by developing the proactive muscles, so to speak, as Covey says. It is not just a matter of positive thinking. That you may incorporate positive thinking in order to be proactive, but it's not positive thinking by itself, because it also includes being creative and resourceful in responding to things that you don't control. And that's the difference. And believing, kind of like Will Smith said, for those that were here at the start of the class, basically Will Smith said he believes he can be president of the United States. He believes he will take on any challenge. If he wants to do it, he said in his words, he's afraid of fear. And so he'll take on, if he's afraid to do something, he'll do it. He'll do it anyway. He'll do it because he's afraid of it. He'll do it. And that basically, he thinks that successful people depends a lot more on what they believe they can do and the impact they can have than what their innate capabilities are. And Covey agrees with him with that. Covey says in his book that a person who's proactive is not just 50% more effective than somebody who's reactive, not just even 100%. He makes the outrageous claim that a person who is proactive is 5,000% more effective than the person who is reactive. I thought about that. 5,000%? That's a lot. Could that possibly be true? And I thought, well, that's an exaggeration, isn't it? And then I started thinking about it, and I'm not so sure it's an exaggeration. Some of you, how many of you were here in week 1? Was anybody here in week 1? The way they do these courses for general education are kind of strange. So a lot of people, you kind of float around until you decide which class to be in. So anyway, in week 1, when most of you weren't here, I showed a PowerPoint. I'm not going to show the PowerPoint again, but I showed a PowerPoint that told the story about about a young man who was a little bit like my nephew that I think I've talked about. My nephew has a 70 IQ or something like that, who has mental disability from lacking oxygen and some stuff when he was born and a variety of things in his life. And in his case, like this other boy, Johnny, that I was talking about before, in this case, my nephew's 40 years old. He doesn't read hardly anything. He doesn't write. Anyway, the same with his boy, Johnny, who was a bagger in a supermarket. Bagger is the person, not a lot of supermarkets here have this, I don't think, but a bagger is somebody who just puts groceries in the bag that the cashier only has to worry about cashiering, and the bagger puts the groceries in the bag and gives it to the shopper. Not a lot of stores in America have baggers anymore either, but some do, a few do. And anyway, Johnny was a bagger because he was mentally delayed. He had a mental handicap. He was never going to be manager. He was never going to be a cashier. But he was a conscientious young man, and in some ways a proactive young man. And so one day the supermarket hired a consultant to come and talk to them about how they could be more successful as a company. And one of the things she said was that that for the company to be successful, everybody should try to be friendlier and try to make shoppers' experience at the store more memorable, more positive. And so, anyway, she did her speech, did her workshop, and nobody did anything. You know, like in most organizations, you get a rah-rah speech like that, and oh, that's cool, and nobody does anything. But Johnny was different. Johnny, with his 70 IQ, he asked himself, what can I do? I'm just a bagger. And so he thought about it, and he thought about it. He said, I know what I could do. I could look up on the internet some really cool thoughts, some thoughts for the day, and I could print them out. My dad would have to help me, but I'll print them out, and I'll sign my name on them, and I'll give them to people when they come, and I'll put them in their bag and say, have a good day. And that's what Johnny did. Well, you know, he called the consultant himself and told her what he was going to do, and she was very pleased that somebody was going to do something based on her presentation. If only the 70 IQ Johnny. She didn't expect much from that. After all, he was only a bagger. But then a month or so later, the manager called her up and said, you can't believe what's happened. Today, and as I was going through the supermarket, there was a long line leading up to the cashier where Johnny was working. And so I announced on the loudspeaker, we need more cashiers up here. And so we got more cashiers, opened up some more cash registers, and the line went all the way back to the frozen food section in the back of the room. And I went and I started getting people to try to move, and nobody would move. I said, no, we want to be in Johnny's line. And so they stayed and waited in line to be in Johnny's line, to get his thought for the day. Over the coming months, they would talk to people and say, yeah, we used to come like once a week, but now we come as often as we can because we want to get Johnny's thought for the day. Then nobody else had been doing anything, but now they saw what Johnny was doing. And so now they had a flower shop as part of the supermarket. And so whenever a flower was, the stem was broken or something, they would fix it up and they'd go give it to a little old lady in the store, or they'd give it to a child or something. And other people started to get involved too. And the entire store changed because of Johnny. Because a 70 IQ kid decided, yeah, I can do something. And he did. He changed the destiny of the entire organization, the entire business, because he decided he could do something. So that's pretty close to a 5,000% increase of capability. Nobody else would do anything, but Johnny did do something. And he changed the destiny of an entire business. So with that in mind, I thought, maybe he's right. Maybe it is a 5,000% difference between somebody who's proactive and somebody who's reactive. I started thinking back to some of my own experiences. I think I'm a fairly naturally proactive person even before I read Covey's book, but because I'm kind of mission-driven. I want to do something. The reason why I didn't become a scientist or didn't become a mathematician isn't because I was better at what I'm doing now, because I wasn't. I was scored extremely high in math and very high in science. My brother was a world-class scientist. I could have been a scientist, but I didn't think that's what I wanted to do. That wasn't part of my mission. That wasn't where I thought I could have the biggest impact. And so instead I did what I've been doing as a journalist and as an educator, because that's what I felt was part of my mission. And that because I have a sense of mission, I am a proactive person by nature, I think. And so just a couple of the things I thought about that have happened. When I first got to my previous university in Kazakhstan, Kimep University, they sent out an invitation for people to participate in the organizing committee for their international research conference. And so I decided to respond to that. And yeah, I have some skills that they could use. I am a professional communicator. And so when they needed something done, and I know desktop publishing, so I can make posters, I can make flyers, I can make newspapers, I can make books, I can make whatever you want to do in desktop publishing, I can do, because that's my profession. I had learned software, so I could do databases, stuff like that, but I don't even remember what they asked me to do that first year. But whatever they needed, I would, I would very frequently volunteer. Oh, yeah, I can do that for you. But I would do it. The most important thing is I would do it. If I volunteered to do something, I would do it to the best of my ability. Whether or not that was a good ability or not, I did it to the best of my ability. Well, along came, again, I had to kind of look back on this over the years and wonder how this all happened, because I was not consciously trying to do anything. I just was trying to help. And I thought an international research conference was a good place to help. But at the end of the several months of setting up this conference, we got to our last meeting before the conference was to begin. And in the meeting was the dean of the School of Business and the chair of the entire conference. I was not in the School of Business. I was in the College of Social Sciences, so I was only there to volunteer. They created the conference. They controlled the conference. It was their baby. And so I was just helping. So anyway, a few days before the conference, we had a meeting. There were about 12 or 15 people around the table talking about what we had to do to finish up and get ready for the conference. The chairman said there's 7 things we have to do. And as we went through the 7 things, he asked me to do 4 of them. So I did 4 of the 7 things, and the other 12 people did 3 of them. Then on the very day of the conference, early in the morning, I get a call first from the chairman, and the chairman says, Ken, you need to be the master of ceremonies for our opening ceremony in our 500-seat great hall that we start the conference with. You need to be the master of ceremonies. And I said, why? Why me? You're the chairman. You should do it. And he said, no, you need to do it. So I said, okay, I guess so. And then I get a call from the dean of the School of Business. Again, I'm in the College of Social Sciences. He's in the College of Business. And the dean says, Ken, you have to be the master of ceremonies. And he didn't know I'd already been called by the chairman of the conference. And I said, you're the dean of the College of Business. This is your conference. You should be the master of ceremonies. He said, no, Ken, you have to do it. So I'm not a good master of ceremonies. You can probably figure that out. I'm not your best professor. I'm not natural at this stuff. But I did it. When we were all done, they had everybody, like 50 people that were participating in the conference line up along these steps for a photograph. And a couple of people started yelling, Ken, you should get up here in front. You're in charge of this. I was in the back row. I said, no, I'm not in charge of anything. I have no official capacity in this at all. I'm just a volunteer. But I see that as a demonstration of somebody who just shows up, and they try, and they accept responsibilities. I would suggest even in some cases you might have a meeting where you have to pull out chairs and somebody has to put them back again. Who's the person that puts them back again? Probably one of the busiest people. He's the person who will accept responsibility. And so one of the busiest people will end up putting the chairs back. And that's kind of me. I'm the person that puts the chairs back. That sort of person becomes more and more important to the people at the top. This is the person I can count on. This is the Johnny. He doesn't have to be smart. He's the guy who shows up. And he's the guy that does what he says he'll do. And so that person, no matter what his IQ is, becomes more and more important to the people at the top of the organization. Because that's the person they can count on. And that's the way I saw, what happened with that situation. Later on, they sent me, because I have a publishing background, a volunteer with the American Peace Corps wanted to have a conference about how NGOs, non-government organizations, could give their message better. And as part of that, she wanted to publish a book. And so somebody sent her to me as somebody could help publish the book. So she told me her plan, and she said, asked me if I would help her. And I said, on the way, you really have a good idea, but I won't help you if we're only gonna set this up for 1 year. I will help you if we will set this up to be permanent every year, because I think this is too important of an idea to have it only 1 year. And so we started looking for other partners in the project, and now it's been going on for, I think it's in its 8th year. We published 7 books. I've co-authored and co-edited 7 books. We have grants. I've gotten, at first, we were just like $10,000 grants and stuff like that.